afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming today for the Beverly Hills Bar Association program titled Tools and Tips for Opening and Growing a Successful Law Practice. Before we begin the program, I would like to inform you that the program materials were either emailed to you or will be posted in the chat during the presentation. MCLE certificates will be emailed to you within 24 hours of the conclusion of this program. To learn about upcoming LMPT programs, we invite you to visit BHBA.org. If you have any ideas for future programs, please feel free to email me or my co-chair, Brian Lepak. I will post our email addresses in the chat. If you have any questions during the program, please feel free to post them in the chat or Q&A, and the speaker will do her best to respond to you. With that, I turn the program over to Ms. Graves, and we thank her for being here today, and we're excited about her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beverly Hills Bar Association, for having me. Yes, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. That's easier for me to see. I would love for this to be more interactive and you ask me whatever you would like to ask. That's why I created the resource. So I do welcome questions. I will be checking the chat as we go through the program. So why am I talking about tools and tips for opening and growing a successful law practice? Well, because over the COVID period, I used the time to create a resource called When Women Run the Firm. I wanted to create something to allow women in particular, but anyone that wanted to know what it was like to have a practice, what it was like to run a practice, how did I get started, questions that I'm asked, quite frankly, very often. So I decided, along with a few of my colleagues who participated in the project, to provide the resource for those who believe they wanted to open a practice or just open a practice and needed a little guidance. So who am I and why do you need to hear from me? Well, I'm Demetria. I attended UC Berkeley, Go Bears, undergrad, graduated from Loyola Law School way back when. And I opened my own firm in 2005. Very shortly after graduating from law school. After passing the bar, I went to a small firm for a short period of time. And I was deciding if I wanted to go and try my hand at another firm or if I was going to try my hand at opening my own law practice. And when people talk to me about this, I say it all the time. I didn't know what I didn't know. So it sounded fun and cool to open a practice. I was a first generation lawyer in my family. I never thought about law firm ownership until it was kind of placed in my lap. I, like most of us law students, believed I would go and make partner at a firm and kind of climb the ranks that way, but that wasn't my calling. So I opened my firm in 2005 and I've been going strong. Well, I've been going most years strong from that time. I eventually became a certified family law specialist. My firm specializes only in family law. We are dedicated to family law. I have a quote unquote office now that we're all remote, office in Pasadena and an office in Beverly Hills. And I have a son, Aiden, and we'll talk about how that all kind of relates to the law firm ownership shortly. I also host a podcast called Legally Uncensored. You can find that on any platform that hosts podcasts. And what that is basically is my contribution back to society, because what I have realized during this period is there are so many people that need access to family law that just don't have the resources to do so. So that's kind of my contribution back to society and help to explain different topics. Most frequently asked questions that us as family law practitioners have, how to present in court, and, whatever I think about in the moment. And then, of course, now what we're talking about today is it's a book, yes, but to me, it's more of a roadmap and a way for people to kind of think through the process of law firm ownership and kind of providing a roadmap in terms of how to get that done. So that's about me. So, as I stated, I wrote the book When Women Won the Firm. It was released, I believe, in July of this year. It's available on Amazon and audio and paperback. I like the paperback personally because there's a lot of homework and you can take notes in the book. Or if you are at all interested, at the end, I will provide my email address and I can email you the basically the blueprint that the book kind of walks you through if you want to have that for your purposes. So what is it? As I mentioned, it's a step-by-step blueprint for those interested or believe they might be interested in law firm ownership. And I believe I'm extremely honest with you in terms of my journey, what I experienced, what I continue to experience, what I kind of wish I knew when I was going through the journey, and everything in between. It's tips and tools for managing law firm ownership and other life responsibilities. And I talk a lot in the book about the discussion of work-life balance and what that really means, if that even exists, and kind of how to better understand how all of the puzzles of your life fit together. And then one of my favorite parts of the book is towards the end, I had the opportunity to interview several of my colleagues about their experiences as women, as minority women, and opening their firms, what that looks like, the hurdles they experience. I have a colleague who is a partner. I don't have a partner. I discussed that in the book, why I don't have a partner. And I have a colleague who loves having a partner. I have a colleague that's kind of transitioning out of law into a different career. So I wanted to provide a overall view of what it looks like. And honestly, it's very different for everybody. So your journey won't look like mine or your friend who did it last year or your friend who'll do it this year. It's a very individual journey. And that's why I wanted to provide the resource for you all from other attorneys so you can kind of get a feel how other people went out on their own. Next slide. So how the book is kind of set up is I did it in what's called pillars, because I believe that to have a successful firm, there are several moving pieces that all work together to make the firm a success. So the more you understand about each pillar, the more you understand about yourself, about what kind of practice you want to have, your life outside of law, I think the better and more successful your law firm will be. So the pillar one, at least for me, as I mentioned before, I think everybody's experience is different. What happens is different. I'm just kind of looking back and trying to give you what basically I wish I would have known when I was opening my practice. So the first pillar for me is really understanding, why do you want to open a practice? I know sometimes it can look fun and exciting and, that flashy object syndrome that we all sometimes experience. But I think it's really important to identify for yourself. Why is it that you want to open a law practice? For me, back when I did it, it was kind of out of necessity. I didn't have a job and I wasn't making a lot of headway on getting a job. And I felt that was what I needed to do at the time. But then as I started to go forward in my career, then I started thinking about financial freedom, my time, having more freedom with my time, being able to make my own schedule, pick my own staff, select the cases that I wanted to work with, stay in the area of law that I I don't know if I enjoy, but I do like, and I like being of assistance to the clients that I get to pick. So I continue to review my why, because to me, I think that helps you sustain why you're doing this. It's not always going to be easy. You're going to have great days, you're going to have average days, and you will have bad days. So I think it's important to have a why that you can come back to in the times that it seems like the world is ending. And I can be honest with you, during this COVID period, it has really become wild for me. So I often remind myself of why I did it, why I continue to do it. And as the years go by, I must say, I am very, very proud of my firm and where I've come from and what I continue to do. So as the years go by, you'll start seeing that for yourself. And then I think a lot of times, especially for women, not to say it's only specific to women, but I think sometimes we are more stopped by our fears. So I think it's a good idea to identify what you are afraid of, what is stopping you from making this step. It is a big step. It's a scary step, but what is really stopping you? Do you feel like you can't do it? Do you feel that you don't have time to do it? I know a lot of us are still managing our families. And I know for me, I have a young son, and then I also have aging parents. So I'm in this sandwich generation in terms of responsibility. So that would be for me a big consideration if I was required to do this all over again. So I think it's important to identify those things so you can work through that and talk to other people who have been where you are and help you feel a little more comfortable. And sometimes I think it's important to sometimes feel the fear and do it anyway. Next slide, please. And again, at any time, if you have any questions, if you have something to say, please let me know. I do want this to be a little more interactive, so please don't be shy. And then on the heels of pillar one, to me is pillar two, is committing to the process for a lot of the reasons that I have specified. It is not going to be easy. There are times where you might mess up big time in court, or an agreement or something, or your clients are upset with you and you want to throw in the towel. But I'm here to tell you it ebbs and flows and it gets better, but you have to commit to the process if it's something that you want to see out long term. And when I say process, I just don't mean the money that you're making or the glitz and glamour that you see, but truly commit to what you are doing and what you want to see in the legal industry. Thank you, Jeffrey, for your question. How did I psych myself up? I think I'm going back to pillar one, everyone. I think for me, it was feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And then I felt motivated by a few people that I knew that had their own firms. I had one mentor at the time that really encouraged me to do it. And I was afraid. I was 6-7 months out of law school. I didn't know anything at the time. You couldn't tell me that, but I can admit that now there was a lot I did not know. But I think I just said, you know what? The worst that can happen is I'm going to have to go and get a job. And I just went for it. So I had to feel the fear and do it anyway. And there are still times when bigger things come up and bigger cases that I ever have come into my office that I still get a little like, uh-oh, this is new for me, but I've adopted the I can do it, feel it, and go through it anyway. And as we'll talk about in some of the other pillars, I think it's extremely important to have colleagues that you trust, mentors that you can call on when you're starting to feel anxiety or afraid of what's coming in your doors, or even if you're just having hesitation of going forward. And I explained in the book about a commitment contract. In the beginning, I was getting, once it sets in that you're really doing this and business is just not raining from the sky, I made a commitment contract to myself and said for X amount of months, we're going to commit to this. We're going to do what we need to do. We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to study. We're going to market. We're going to do all these things. Because there were times where I did have to go back and say, okay, we committed to this. And so that's something that I encourage everyone to do is consider writing a commitment contract to yourself and maybe limiting the time. You might say, I'm going to give myself a year to see if I like this or I can get this off the ground. If not, you know, decide for yourself what your options are. If it's going to work for someone else or transitioning out of law, whatever it is that you want to do. But I think it's important to have a commitment to yourself and to your practice. And more importantly, is committing to riding the waves, the good and the bad, because especially for us that are in family law, it's a lot of that. So you have to get to a place where you can be understanding with yourself, because as we all know, this is the practice of law. So we should always be learning and getting better and adjusting and doing the whole process again. So committing to riding the waves, the good and the bad, is just as important as your commitment to the process. Someone asked, did creating a business model assist in any way in the process? And we are going to talk about that. That is one of my pillars. But to answer your question, because I was so new, I didn't have a business model. I didn't know. I just wanted to get clients and get the business going. But as I've become more established and had the business for some time, I knew what kind of client I wanted to work with. I knew what kind of an attorney I wanted to show up as. I knew that although I'm in a very, very heated area of the law, I knew I wanted to show up in a different way. So that meant I might not be a millionaire, but I would feel okay with how I show up in the practice, what kind of clients I wanted to take, and then what would make me more comfortable and kind of going through the process. So my next pillar is gather as much information as possible from other attorneys that you might admire or you think are successful. And you'll be surprised. A lot of attorneys are really good at wanting to share information, wanting to help, are very encouraging with their challenges, their experiences, the pros and the cons of practice, and all of that great stuff. So I think it's important to do a fact-finding session, if you may, for yourself in terms of pros and cons, kind of what you think it looks like versus the reality of what that looks like. And the more attorneys that you speak with, the more you'll see kind of how you want to draft your model, draft your firm. And I think the beauty now, as we all know, after COVID, there's such a big shift in terms of how we run our practices, what that looks like. Do we need, the regular office space? Is everyone staying at home? So there's so many moving factors now. And for different areas and for different firms, that looks different. I can tell you for myself, my firm and my staff, we're still at home. I think everyone kind of settled in and we all are kind of in a flow. So I didn't feel the need to kind of disrupt that. But I have colleagues that, are doing more of a hybrid, that some of their staff stay at home or they're required to come certain days a week. And there's pros and cons to that. I think some people do enjoy going to the office, getting a break from home. I can completely understand that. But that's why I think it's important to gather information, to talk to other attorneys so you can really decide for yourself what's best for you. And then understand the business of a law practice. Yes, you're practicing law. You kind of know the basics of that, but then you're also running a business, and each city might have separate rules for running a business. Do you need a business license? What does that look like? Taxes, you name it. So I think it's important to have an understanding of the business of running a law practice as well. And also managing the business, right? So you have a business, you're practicing law, and you have to manage all of that. So I think it's important to kind of understand how all of that works together. So this is pillar 4. So in this pillar, I talk about running your law practice. And what I came to realize is systems are absolutely necessary in terms of your staff, making sure you're organized during the day, and making sure the business is running as a system and not that you're being pulled every which way. So what do I mean by system? For me, there's a system for every different part of the business. From when potentials call, there's a system for that. If there are appointments set, there's a system for that. If a client decides not to retain us at that moment, there's a system for that. If a client decides they want to retain us, there's a system for that. And then there's a system how we handle the case. There's a system how we interact with clients. There's a system of how we close out cases. To me, that way, everybody is running the system of the practice and you're not being pulled every which way. And I think it makes it way more easier to be organized, way more easier to assign tasks to your staff. And a lot of different programs and that sort of thing make it way easier than when I initially started. But I think it's extremely important to decide earlier the better, kind of what your systems are. How is your firm going to run through the systems? Who's going to manage each system for you? And then I also had to decide if I was going to have a partner or no partner, or staff or no staff. So when I started again, there wasn't a lot of financial resources there. So I didn't have a big staff. And kind of what happened was, as time went on, I kind of added part-time staff here, part-time staff there based on what I needed. And for those of you that don't know, family law is form heavy. So I started to hire people that can help me with some of the completion of the forms, and then people that can help manage my calendar and that sort of thing, so I can actually practice law and do the heavy lifting, if you may. I tried to have a partner twice, and it did not work out for me. I don't know if I'm just not the partner type. They might say it's me. I don't know, but that didn't work for me. Some people, it works very well. My colleague that I mentioned to you, she has a partner in which her partner prepares all of the legal documents, all of the declarations, all of the heavy lifting, if you may, in terms of the documents that need to be filed. And then she meets with clients and she goes to court. So their system works perfect for them, and it might work perfect for you. But again, that's also part of your fact finding in trying to decide what's best for you. What is your business structure? It might be such as myself, where I've hired now 2 paralegals, legal assistants that kind of help me with that stuff. And I handle the court appearances, talking to opposing counsel, talking to clients, that sort of thing. So again, a lot of this is part of your fact finding, finding your systems, finding what kind of staff you want to have. And then I do talk a lot about keeping your expenses low, right? So we're in Southern California. So everything is so flashy. So we always think we have to spend a lot of money and that sort of thing. But this is not the place for that. I think it's extremely important, especially early on, to try to keep your expenses as low as possible while you are building the firm. You don't want to incur unnecessary debt if you can avoid it. And again, all of that is part of your fact finding. One second, we have a few questions. Well, in the beginning, the question is my motivation for deciding my firm's location. In the beginning, again, I'm from Pasadena, so I knew I wanted to be in the area. What I would recommend now is researching who is in the area. What I should have done then, I should say, is research kind of who is in the area, where I should have my practice, but I didn't. And now I don't think it matters as much because everybody is everywhere. you can now be in Northern California, helping or assisting in cases here in Southern California. So I don't think the location of the office matters as much as it did, a few years ago, because we're all kind of everywhere. I've had several cases now, especially post COVID, of people from all over California assisting in cases. And I've actually been asked to help in cases in Northern California. So I don't think the location of the office matters. But if you are thinking about going back in office, then I would consider kind of what your life looks like. How far do you want to be? I know in some of my cases, some people cared that I had an office. I say office loosely. It was more of a satellite office in Beverly Hills, and I had one in Pasadena. So depending on your client base, some people may care about that depending on your clientele. So Century City has a nice ring to it. Beverly Hills has a nice ring to it. I would like to think Pasadena has a nice ring to it, but it really depends on your clients and your client base and kind of what you're looking for. I'm going to get to how I attracted clients shortly. Any more questions on this slide before I move on? Okay, not seeing any. Okay, next slide, please. So this goes to the question that was just asked in terms of my next pillar, which I have identified on as pillar 5, is marketing is your business. And I talk a lot in the book about you can be the best attorney, Harvard grad, #1 in your class, smartest person you know, but if no one knows that your business exists, then it really doesn't matter. And so to me, this was one of my biggest hurdles in the beginning, not kind of knowing what to do. When I first started, everyone was still marketing in the yellow pages and, people were buying the big ads. And that's when you had to decide if it was color or if you wanted to just do a black ad. And what else was there? Oh, remember all of the fancy websites and all of the companies that would market to attorneys in terms of the biggest website and the most expensive website. So those were my decisions. Then I think now there are so many options in terms of a marketing strategy, right? You have social media, you have YouTube, you have podcasts, you name it, you can do it. And so I think there's a market and there's a space for every practice area because so many people are looking for information. And the best thing I've learned in terms of marketing is people don't really care how long we've been practicing law, all of that stuff. They want to know from other people, one, are you good? And what are you offering to them? Right? That's great that you passed the bar, you're a lawyer, but what information? We're in an information type market now. So what are you giving to the potential client? And it's way more touches now in terms of how many times people have to see you to want to do business with you. And because the information is so accessible across so many different platforms, you have to be consistent with whatever you decide to do. In the book, I say, I think it's important to choose a couple of strategies you think work for you. And that might require you to do a lot of, testing what works best for your firm. I know for my particular firm right now, I do a lot of discussion online about what's going on in the celebrity world as it relates to family law. So if something happens, I'll give you an example. Just recently, it was alleged that Dr. Dre was served with some form of divorce documents at a funeral. So I posted about that on social media, and that gets this discussion going from those who don't really know how family law works. And then, you go kind of back and forth. And then, so I do a lot of that just to, show people that is my practice area. So when people think about divorce, they'll say, oh, well, Demetria and the Graves Law Firm discuss divorce, or Dr. Dre, or whatever it is. I also, as I mentioned in the start of the program is I have a podcast as well, again, providing information. So I think it's important to also YouTube. Everyone loves YouTube and videos. So I think it's important to identify your strategy because it's going to be different for everyone in terms of what works best for you. But there's so much more now than when I started. But I want to reiterate for you, marketing is your business because people need to know who you are. And always be open to reviewing and adjusting your strategy because what worked for you one year might not work the next year. Because as you see, as I said before, Yellow Pages was it when I started, and then that changed. Websites were the big thing for a long time. Now, as we see, that's changing. It's going towards social media. There are attorneys that have been successful on TikTok. I didn't really get into that, but that worked for other attorneys. So I think you always have to be reviewing and adjusting, but never stop marketing your practice. And the golden egg in this, if you may, is referrals. So if you can work with other attorneys that don't practice in your area and get to know them and be really friendly with your other colleagues that you went to law school and otherwise to refer you those cases that they don't handle in their own firms. To me, that is the golden egg, but there are so many other ways to make sure that you are out and about. Okay, let me see. We have a more question. Someone asked, how did I get to know judges in other areas of the state? Well, I'm getting to that age where a lot of my colleagues are becoming judges, or my colleagues might know judges, or researching about those judges, asking my colleagues about the judges, reading about the judges. That's kind of what I've been doing lately. Okay, hold on. There's a question of what social media platform do I find most effective for my practice? For me, it's been Instagram and Facebook. Again, because I can engage my audience in terms of it's easier for me because I have the celebrity tie-in that everybody seems really obsessed with these days. So it's easy to engage, not only potential clients, but other attorneys and everyone else that wants to hear kind of my take on whatever is happening. I know I just talked about the Robert De Niro prenup and everyone wanted to know why his wife received what she did. So it's a platform for me and my firm to kind of weigh in on matters relating to family law. So those have been the most helpful for my practice. Someone has asked me, when I podcast or other social media posts, do you worry that you might get it wrong? Yes, but I do it anyway. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And in a podcast, if I need to correct myself, I can go back and, in the next episode say, hey, I said this, but I want to correct myself. I meant that. But yes, I've been wrong and I can admit it. But, you say what you need to say and you move on. If I find out I'm wrong, I correct it. And then, yes, I just continue to move forward and hope I don't get it wrong again. And trust me, if I get something too wrong, people do let you know harshly sometimes on social media. But you take the good with the bad and keep doing what you're doing. I did. Another question asked me about blogging. I did a lot of blogging in the beginning when websites were a big thing. And some people still are very, very successful with blogs. That's just not part of my strategy. Some people still blog. Some people do video blogs. Some people do Facebook Lives. Some people do Instagram Lives. And, for each firm, it worked for them. I tried, I think, Instagram Live for a while, and it just wasn't effective for me, at least not right now. That might change. But right now, it's currently not part of my my marketing strategy. Once you have opened your firm, you're feeling confident, you're on your way, you really want to make sure that you're managing your clients and your cases and their expectations in a way that you are doing a great job, right? Because that's why we do all of this. And I think this comes back to what I discussed in terms of systems and how you're going to get back to your clients, how you are going to establish your expectations. To me, this is really, really a big deal in family law, not to over promise what I'm going to do or sell my clients the moon, star, and the ocean, because sometimes that's what they want to hear, but that's not necessarily what's going to happen. So I've made it a really big thing in my office to make sure I am honest. I don't promise the moon and the stars. I try to be very direct in terms of what's going to happen and kind of what my firm boundaries are. I don't like to play games. I kind of like to see what's on the table. Let's have a strategy for how we want to go forward, and we go from there. If I think that there's a client that I know that's just not going to listen, or they don't align with what our kind of expectations are as a firm, then I just won't take that case. And that was really hard for me to do in the beginning, right? Because you're building and you think you need the financial resources, but I am here to tell you that all money is not good money. So you have to establish boundaries and rules for yourself, such as if you've had 3 or 4 attorneys in a family law case, I'm probably not going to take the case. And I communicate a lot of what my expectations are to the client. And then I also allow the client to communicate back to myself and my staff kind of what they're looking for and how they want to see their case go. We have another question. Please hold. What are my thoughts on Google search ads or PPC? Again, that was really, really popular, some time ago, but then Facebook came out with their ads, and I find Facebook ads to be just as effective and a little more cost effective. People still do use Google ads, but it is really pricey. And I've found if I'm promoting a podcast episode or when I was promoting my book, Facebook ads tended to be cost effective and also extremely effective as well. No, someone said they had a lot of attorneys on their case to resolve it. And you're right. It's not always the client, but I think that's part of what I'm saying, that it's important for the client to voice their expectations and what they think they want to see happen, and then for the firm to do the same, to try to minimize any in-house conflict, if you may. Okay, next slide, please. And so in my next pillar, and Carol, I'll get to your question in 2 seconds. I'll handle this pillar and then I'll come back. And in pillar 7, I talked a lot about the attorney court experience for myself as an African-American woman, for new attorneys, kind of what that was like, preparing for court, preparing for opposing counsel, some nice, some not so nice, just preparing for the whole experience of being the managing attorney and making decisions. Sometimes that might end up not being the best decision made, but being that person, being the managing attorney, making the decisions, deciding how you want to show up in court. I've seen a trend lately that a lot of people don't dress up like we did when I initially started. So identifying for yourself, again, how you want to show up, how you're going to prepare, how you're going to learn your judge, how you're going to respond when opposing counsel is not so nice to you. And I'm still working on that. I can admittedly tell you that, but I talk a lot about that experience and kind of what that looks like as a managing attorney. And then preparing your clients for court. I had to learn, we do something so much, we just kind of assume that people know the basics of coming early, what to wear, where to park, how to speak to the court, how to not interrupt. So I thought it was really important to develop a system of communicating to clients, kind of what that process looked like, how it's changed so much during COVID. We did a whole campaign with the firm and sent out to clients kind of how things are changing, what to expect when we should go in person. For the most part, we're still remote. So the more you prepare the client, talk to the client, the less they call you and want to take up all your time all day. So I've noticed when we play offense and provide that information, the more we do that, the more the client feels comfortable and there's less, panic calls to your office. And then we also get feedback from past clients and that sort of thing. So we can make sure that what we do want to set forth is actually what's happening. I have a few questions. Someone asked, when you say celebrity tie-in, what do I mean? So what I mean is if there's something going on in the celebrity world that is also directly related to family law, then I will talk about it. So just recently, there was an article about Robert De Niro's wife getting $1 million in spousal support and money for the house, but she was not eligible, if you may, for receiving half of his fortune, and they've been married several years. So everyone wanted to know, how was that possible? He had a valid prenup. So we talked a lot about that. There's a lot going on about Dr. Dre and his divorce. So I talk about that. So that's what I mean about celebrity tie-in. I will find a case that's related to family law in the celebrity world and talk about it. I have a system for clients. What I do is when they call, we set them for an appointment on my schedule. So instead of just calling, we'll say, hey, we're going to carve out this block of time for you to speak to Attorney Graves. Sometimes it doesn't go like that if we're preparing for court or something along those lines. But for the most part, I set appointments for clients, give them the time they need to ask me questions. And then I also, throughout the case, have strategy calls, discussions after court and that sort of thing. As I mentioned, the more you play offense and call your client, the less they're going to call you. At least that's been my experience. Okay. Next slide, please. And so I spent in this pillar a lot of discussion of the lack or the non-existence, if you may, of work-life balance, kind of what that meant. And I just don't think that there is a work-life balance. I think there are your priorities, and then there are other things that you kind of have to take care of. So it took me a long time to kind of manage life and manage the practice and learn that everything is not going to be important at the same time. I think one good thing that I did was start my practice before I started a family. And then so the practice was more important before I had Aiden. And then once I had Aiden, then things kind of shifted and he became the priority. And then I had to start working around kind of his schedule, how I wanted to show up for him, and then how I wanted to show up for my family, and then, how I wanted to show up in the practice. So everything kind of adjusts depending on what's most important in your life and in your world. And that's okay. And we all have to be okay with that being okay. So I don't think it is healthy to try to manage everything at the same importance and realize that it's going to change at different cycles and different times of your life, and being okay with that. And with that, and I think a lot of this has been presented during the COVID time, is managing your mental health, managing your breaks, being okay with taking breaks. What I've decided to do and what I have done over the last couple of years is carve out in the beginning of the year what my breaks are going to be. And under no circumstances will I have hearings set on that time. I make sure that my staff knows that. If I need to get a continuance, if something is set, I do that, because I think it's important to make sure you take breaks. The work is always going to be there. It is not going anywhere. So the more you take care of you, the more you can take care of others. Next slide, please. And then my pillar 9, I talk a lot about the biggest lessons I've learned in managing the practice. And I'm going to go to that because I want to talk to you about that in terms of kind of what I wish I would have known. And again, all of this is in my lovely little companion book, as you may. And again, that's on Amazon. And I think I mentioned this, but I think it's important. And I tell everyone this when I am speaking about my experiences. You are running a business and managing a firm. So make sure you are solid in knowing in your particular city what is important, what you need to do. Make sure you're doing what is important to keep your business running. Do not neglect your family and your other desires outside of work, because if you allow it, as we mentioned, work can take over. You can work from sun up to sundown if you don't create your own personal life boundaries. And like I said in the beginning, that might be it, right? Right. While you're establishing the practice, you might feel like you're working sun up to sundown, but at some point you have to start managing, where you're going to focus your time. Systems. That was the biggest changing factor in helping me manage my time and making sure the firm was running, is making sure that I had particular systems in place for different areas of the practice. And don't sweat the small stuff. You're going to make mistakes. You're not always going to get it right. You're going to have opposing counsel that likes to brag about, winning or beating you or whatever it is, but don't sweat it. Learn your lesson, vow to do it better the next time, and move on. It's not going to help you to get tied down with things that didn't happen how you thought they should happen, but I promise you, you will be okay. Preparation. I know a lot of us probably heard this in law school, but the more prepared you are, the more confident you will begin to feel. I still spend a lot of time preparing when I have longer hearings and that sort of thing. I still type out my questions. I still ask mentors questions about cases. I'm not ashamed of that, because I feel like in the practice of law, you're always going to have questions, and it's okay. And it's okay to be over prepared, and it's okay to ask. But the more prepared you are, the more comfortable you're going to feel. And we talked about keeping our expenses low. That is important, especially when you are starting your practice. And know the law, never stop learning. And I think that's extremely important. And COVID has made it easy for you to jump on a webinar or get the information in the comfort of your own home now. I think it's important to always stay on top of what's going on. Law is always changing, forever moving. So know the law and don't stop learning. And be excellent. Be excellent in your field. Be nice to opposing counsel. We don't have to fight each other and be mean and do all of that stuff. So be the example. I try. I don't always get it right, but I do try to be excellent, to be cordial to my opposing counsel, to try to handle these cases with integrity. I think we owe it to the profession to all handle our cases in that manner. And then if you can in your field, become an expert. I think it means something to the client, and it shows your dedication. If you become a certified specialist, if you have that opportunity in your field, I think it shows commitment, not only to your clients, but to the practice area. And I try to do this, and I try to treat others how I would want to be treated and how I wanted to be treated when I first started. It's not always returned, but I really try. And I encourage you to do the same and find a good mentor. And you might have several, but I think it's important to have that encouragement, to have someone that you know has done this before and that can kind of guide you through the way. And most importantly is really believe that you can do this. We all started, all of us that have firms, the small firms, the medium firms, the big firms, we all started somewhere from the beginning, right? So it's one day at a time, but I'm here to tell you, I didn't have anyone in my family that went to college. I was the first generation lawyer. I had no experience owning a business, let alone a law practice. So believe me, if I could do this with all of the things I had to go through, you can too. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, I also had the opportunity to enlist some of my colleagues that I highly respect to share their experiences in the book. So I interviewed each one of these lovely ladies, and they provided their insight in terms of how they run their practices, how they started their practice, kind of some of the challenges that they experienced. And they all were very helpful in providing different ways to look at law firm ownership. Some started right out of law school, some started, after a few years, some started much later. So I wanted to provide everyone with a overall view of what it looked like and to help you understand that there's no right way to do it. If it's something you want to do, it's just a matter of getting it done. So we have more questions. So in terms of systems, I'm giving this company a shameless plug, but for instance, I use My Case. So in My Case, it provides different tools, right? So I have an assistant that knows when a client calls, that person goes into what we call leads, and that's in My Case. And then that assistant knows kind of when to schedule that person. An email is sent out to remind them, so forth and so on. So that's one system. Once I talk to that lead, then it's decided if that person is going to, sometimes people call and just obtain information. So they might hire you later, or they might decide, hey, this is a go, we're going to do this now. So if they don't hire us right away, then they go into a different system, and then we follow up with them for so many times. Either they retain us or we kind of let it go. So that's another system. There's a system if someone retains us, then my staff knows there's a system in terms of getting the retainer payments out. That's a different system. Once all that is done, then there's a system on creating a strategy call with me in terms of expectations, what we're going to do, how we're going to do the case. So there's another system for that. And then, of course, there's a system once I have the strategy call in terms of how we're going to do the case. And then after that, then once the case is done, there's a system in terms of closing out the case and making sure the client knows the case is closed out, if they need to get any materials back from our office. And then I'm sure there's others, but overall, that's kind of how we break down our systems. Is there a way you can isolate my screen? I don't know. That's out of my expertise here. So someone asked, what is my thought on having a small personal practice while working a firm job? As long as your firm is okay with that, I think that's a great way to build a practice. And sometimes the firm, if they can't help particular client because the costs are really high or whatever the situation may be, they might allow you to do that. And they may actually refer you business. I think it's important to make sure your firm is okay with that. Other than that, that's a great way to start to kind of build your practice and then ultimately decide if that's something that you want to do. Because I've had colleagues say, yes, I'm doing this, and then they start and realize it is a lot of work. So that way you can see why you still have a job if it's something that you want to do, as long as your firm is okay with you doing so. I think that's a great idea. We're almost at about time. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. My last slide, please. Oh, so at the end of the book, what I did was after each pillar, I kind of have questions, homework in terms of what your next steps are, what I think you should be doing after each pillar. And then at the end, you have a full outline of kind of your homework but basically a blueprint for how to show up with your plan on how you're going to open your practice, what your next steps are. So that is basically your prize of reading the book. Again, it's a book, yes, but to me, it's more of a roadmap, information for you and homework assignments and things for you to do to make sure you feel confident in going forward and opening your practice. Okay. Yes, if you are working for a firm and you're in the same area, you might have to do some conflicts, but if it works out, it works out, right? There's so many attorneys that practice in family law, that sort of thing. So it wouldn't be, as long as there's an understanding, it would be okay. How did I decide on my case management system? Thank you. That's a great question. I went through many, believe me, but for me, my case was the most easiest to navigate. It was the easiest to understand for myself and my staff, and I find them to be very accessible. So a lot of trial and error, but that's what I ultimately decided on. Oh, I can't. I use the malpractice insurance that I think through the state bar. I can't think of the name right now. And I just did that. But yes, get malpractice insurance, most definitely, especially if you're in family law. Okay, next slide. So here is the book again. It's called When Women Run the Firm. It is, yes, quickly. Randy, my case does have conflict software. Thank you all so much for spending an hour with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you received a lot of useful information, and more importantly, you'll check out the book. And thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Thank you.